Limerick Schools Board of Education meeting, special meeting, 1538 for tax rate hearing is now called to order. Meetings are now fully open to in-person and live streamed on our district YouTube channel. In accordance with the CDC, vaccinated individuals are to wear face coverings indoor areas, in addition to masking for all teachers, staff, students, visitors, regardless of vaccination status. Therefore, face coverings are required for individuals in attendance at all times. 2.0, we do have our presentation, Joelle, for the proposed 2021 tax rate.
This special hearing is annual and is to set the tax rate for the school district for the ensuing school year. The tax rate is distributed to the county on 10/1, and it will be the rate that is paid with real estate and personal property taxes due on December 31st. This year, it was a reassessment year, and the average assessed valuation growth in Lindbergh School District was a little over 8%. The CPI, which is the state auditor and DESI's rate of inflation, was 1.4%, so we're limited to that growth. So the levy that we're asking to set for effective this year, the total is $3.81. 83 cents of that is in the debt service fund, and $2.98 is in the operating fund. Because of the growth in assessed valuation, the district was rolled back its levy 22 cents this year. So the levy last year was $4.03. This year is $3.81. And with this rollback, the residential rate for the Lindbergh School District real estate taxes will be at $2.75, which is the lowest rate possible in the state of Missouri for a residential tax rate. We have this hearing for people to answer questions, and me to ask questions and for me to answer. But here's, if you want to roll up a little bit, Colin. To the bottom of the page, it just shows, this shows our, the yellow is the tax rate we're asking to be approved tonight. And it shows all categories. It has the residential at $2.75, and then there's different rates for agricultural, commercial, and personal property, and then our debt rate. So $3.81. Less than last year.
I do think it's important that, Joelle kind of mentioned it, the 275, that is the state of Missouri, that is as low as the tax rate can be. So we have the lowest tax rate in the county for our residential property. Us and one other school district in the county are the only two that are sitting at 275. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that that's the state law. It can't go below 275. So that's where it is. That's as low as it can be right there, 275 for residential.
Yep, the tax rate calculation is a hold harmless for taxpayers. You have to roll back your tax rate if assessed valuation growth is higher than what they deem as inflation. So on years, and pretty much our rate is back to close to what we were in 2010 because of over time in that 10-year period, our values in the area have grown faster than inflation, or the number the state uses for inflation. So it's a hold harmless taxpayer calculation.
Any other questions? Now, in 3.0, you also, anyone who would like to come forward and address the board regarding the proposed tax rate can do so at this time. Okay. Hearing none, I guess, do I have a motion to adjourn special Board of Education meeting 1538?
So moved.
Motion by Jen, second. Second by Mike. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, board meeting 1538 is adjourned. And we'll move to now our regular meeting, 1539. 2.0, Dr. Lake, do we have any changes to the agenda?
We do not.
Okay, do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Motion
Second.
by Matt, second by Kathy. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And then now I'll invite anyone who would like to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. The students who are here tonight, did you want to start us in the pledge? Okay. Go ahead. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, great. All right, tonight, 4.0 special recognition Spearing Middle School. So Dr. Boger, if you want to take over here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Lauren Boger. I'm the principal at Spearing. Tonight we are going to recognize a few amazing individuals in our building. We have our support staff person of the year, our teacher of the year, and our 2 outstanding 8th graders. So first I would like to ask that our support staff person of the year, Miss Sarah Doza, come up right next to me, please, so I can say a few words. Give it up for Sarah. So Sarah is our support staff of the year for the 2021 school year. It has been a pleasure the last 4 years working with you. You're going into your 5th year as our guidance secretary administrative assistant. And Sarah brings a strength to Lindbergh and to Spearing on a daily basis. If you haven't seen her in action in the guidance center, you should. Really, the guidance center is the heart of Spearing. She helps Miss Christinell and Mr. Swadish on a minute-to-minute basis. She knows our students' names. She can help us with cameras and just identifying kids quickly. And Sarah, you just really take care of us each and every day, and I appreciate you so much. So congratulations, Sarah Doza.
Sarah, we have a certificate here for you to say congratulations, and then we also have a $25 gift card to our online store, so you can get some spirit wear. I've gotten to know Sarah over the years. She was on my faculty advisory council and got to spend some time with Sarah. She does an amazing job over there. We're very fortunate to have her working in our district, so congratulations, Sarah.
And also Sarah's joined this evening by her family as well, Chris and Reese. If you guys could stand up as well and wave. Next up is our Teacher of the Year, Senora Elizabeth Derrickson. Please come forward. Senora Derrickson is our Teacher of the Year for Spearing Middle School. The list goes on and on with Senora Derrickson, and I want to start with a really cool accomplishment that you had just this past weekend. Elizabeth ran in a half marathon in Kansas City in the Patriot Run, and she sent me a picture with her medal on September 11th, so what a great accomplishment. Congratulations for that, too. At Spearing, her leadership roles are endless. She is a building leadership team member, our modern language department chair, our cross-country coach, our track coach. She has also served with Dr. Lake on his advisory crew, and I'm probably missing a few things, but the last 4 years have been a blessing to have you as a leader, and you're going into your 7th year at Spearing and 15 as a Spanish teacher. So congratulations, Senora Derrickson, Teacher of the Year for Spearing.
We have a certificate as well for you, and then we have the $25 gift card to our online store. And again, just thank you for everything you do for Spearing. You are a kid magnet. You can see those kids really gravitate to you in your classroom. So thank you for all that you do.
And Senora Derrickson is also joined by her 2nd grade daughter, Lydia. So Lydia's in 2nd grade at Kennerly. Give it up for Lydia. All right, now we are going to recognize our 2 outstanding 8th graders. Each year, we ask our staff for 2 students that represent the take flight mindset at Sparing. And this year, without a doubt, our first student that we are going to recognize this evening is Ryan Brooks. Ryan, come on up. All right, Ryan, I told you were going to have to give a speech. Are you ready? Yes, we were joking about it all week. He was very excited to represent Sparing, our students, and as an 8th grade leader. When we asked the staff about our take flight mindset and flying strong, Ryan, your name rose to the top, and I quote from your teachers, "You rocked ARC out of the park." So last year, Ryan in Zooms was the most engaged student that I ever saw in a Zoom as an ARC student in our virtual program, and I think you should be just completely thrilled that your teachers, every one of them, when we went to the teams, said, Ryan, Ryan, Ryan. So thank you, Ryan, for all that you do, and you are an outstanding 8th grader at Sparing.
Hey, Ryan. So we have a certificate for you, and then we also have a shirt for you as well. All right? Congratulations. All right. There you go, buddy. Let's get a picture. We're going to get a picture. Yeah, we're going to get a picture.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. And Ryan is also here this evening, joined by Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad, can you please stand up? Thank you again, Brooks family. Thank you. Our second outstanding 8th grader this evening is Isabella Christ. Come on up. So Isabella Chris, you are also an outstanding 8th grader at Sparing, representing the Take Flight mindset. What rises to the top for you is your leadership in a new crew at Sparing, flight crew. She really stepped up last year, virtual meetings, virtual conferences with Character Strong. This year you welcomed both virtually and in person our new class of 6th graders, and you're always there for me to ask a question, and you really are a leader, a student leader with a strong voice, and I appreciate you. Congratulations, Isabella.
We have a certificate for you, and then we also have a shirt for you as well. So congratulations, and thank you for all that you're doing and being a great classmate there at Sparing. All right.
So Chris family, if you could also stand. Her brother, sister, mom, and dad are in the house. And also, because I do feel like this is a night for Sparing, if you are a family member at Sparing, please stand up so that I can recognize you for being here and all that you do for Sparing. Yay!
Thank you, and congratulations to all those that were recognized, and anyone who's had to deal with Thomas or Ryan Shamio should probably get another recognition. Maybe we'll do that at the next meeting. But now we'll let everyone leave who was part of the recognition. But first, before we do that, we just want to stop and have a moment of silence for fallen Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz, who was buried today. So if we could just take a moment and recognize his courageousness. Thank you for that, and thank you to anybody in the audience who's served our country as well. Now, if you were here for the recognition, we'll take a few moments. Feel free to leave before we get to the business part of the meeting. Okay, we'll continue with 5.0, which is the adoption of the proposed tax rate that we heard prior to this meeting. So we held our meeting, and Joelle gave us a presentation regarding that tax rate. There was an opportunity given for anyone to come forward who wanted to talk to the board about that rate or ask questions. So now's the time to vote on the adoption of the proposed 2021 tax rate. So do I have a motion to approve the 2021 tax rate as presented? Motion by Mike,
Second.
second by Jen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. 6.0, this is the time for citizen comments regarding agenda items. So at this time, it looks like we have 2 individuals who have signed up. So just as a refresher, we do allow 3 minutes for you to come forward and make a comment to the board. So we're going to start with Sherd White. Hopefully I said that right. Okay, perfect. This is the first time for everything.
I had girls, so it's gonna go away at that point, so. Are we still okay while talking? Okay, I just wanna make sure. First off, I just wanna say thank you, guys. I know this is a very thankless job, especially in this political climate, and I appreciate your commitment to our kids. Not for money, but just for, the desire to improve education, so thank you. Again, my name's Sherd. I have 2 kids, 2 beautiful daughters at Crestwood Elementary School, and I'm here today in support of the folks that lead, who are trying to impart knowledge, acceptance, and compassion for the differences that we have to all our children. We applaud the district's choice to hire a DEI coordinator, and we feel like that has the support of the majority of parents, even though there's a vocal minority that says they don't. We ask that the district not be distracted by the CRT boogeyman. Critical race theory is a relatively obscure legal theory that examines the way in which racism is institutional. I'm sure you guys know this, but and it's now cited as the basis for all diversity and inclusion efforts, and regardless of how much that's actually informed, these programs that we're doing now. No matter how many times it's repeated, teaching equity, inclusion, diversity to our children is not the same thing as teaching CRT necessarily. We implore the board not to let fear of one group turn positive change into that boogeyman. DEI training is the antithesis of dividing people into oppressed or oppressor groups. It's not about focusing on differences. It isn't about blame. These terms get thrown around and have no basis for what is actually being taught to our children. Through my interactions with the people in lead and who are leading these efforts, I know that's the case. Why are some in our community afraid to talk about DEI? Why are we trying to censor discussion regarding bias, racism, gender inequality at school? I honestly think it makes people uncomfortable to admit their faults, or look at our parents' generation or their generation and so on, these people we love, and criticize their decisions in the past. Teaching DEI isn't about assigning blame, but moving forward and growing as a community. As a parent, I'm sure other parents in the room feel the same way. I make mistakes constantly. The way I get past that is I talk to my children about my mistakes. I apologize, I listen to them, and I try and hear what they're saying. So I'm not always successful, but that doesn't stop me from trying to do so. Saying that culturally responsive teaching, equity, and diversity training shouldn't be a priority is the same thing as saying we're afraid to have these meaningful discussions with our children, or believing that our children don't have the intellectual capability of having these discussions. There's a quote that I discovered as a young boy in a book that I loved, fear is the mind killer. And that seems especially relevant these days. We can't let fear keep us from having meaningful and impactful discussions about what diversity truly means. We can't be afraid to honor equity in education, and we can't be afraid to include those who are different than ourselves. We must acknowledge these faults of the past and teach our children the good and bad of our history so that they make better decisions than we have. To wrap up here, how do we improve diversity without talking about the lack of diversity in our district and the reasons for the lack of diversity? How do we set up our children for future success if we don't aim to help students identify and critique these issues? So, thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Your work, so.
We have one more speaker, Mandy Mantia? I was 1 for 1.
So mine's more of a question, I don't know. It's about the COVID procedures. If a student who tests positive from COVID receives their removal from isolation letter and they have a sibling who has been quarantined from them for the time period, is there a negative test required for that sibling to come back to school if the other student has received their removal of isolation letter? And if so, why? I feel like we're punishing the sibling and they have no symptoms.
Yeah, so, and just so you know, how this works is we don't respond to comments publicly, but somebody will reach out to you if you'd like.
Brian McKinney.
Okay,
Yeah, Brian McKinney will reach out to you tomorrow.
will get you that information.
Yeah.
I'll just call you probably, that's okay.
okay, that's
It
fine.
might
Yeah, I
be-
didn't know
Yeah,
who else
perfect.
to ask
Yeah.
or where to.
For
It's
something
We'll
more
get-
specific like that, it's best to talk.
Just
directly.
reach out to us and the staff, somebody will get you your answers for sure. So,
Okay, great.
All right, thanks for
Thank you.
coming.
Thank you.
All right, we have no other speakers regarding agenda items, and we thank you tonight for coming and addressing the board. We'll move to 7.0, which is communications, so we'll start with calendar events. So, Madam Secretary.
Alrighty, so this Saturday is the Suncrest Parade, which is Sunset Hills and Crestwood combined. So that's going to be very exciting. We always look forward to that. Next week is homecoming week, huge week. Everybody's super excited. The parade is going to be on Friday, and then we'll follow that with the football game. And yes, we will be having a dance on Saturday night, but it'll be out on the football field, which the students are super excited about. We have a facilities advisory meeting also next week to the 22nd, and then we have our distinguished alumni banquet at Royal Orleans in the middle of that week as well. Sorry. October 1st is National Custodians Day, and so we always want to thank our custodians for all their hard work and keeping our buildings just super sharp at all times. October 1st starts the beginning of National Principals Month, and of course, we want to thank our principals every chance we get for their leadership. The fall play, the LHS fall play, is scheduled for October 14th through 16th. We will then start with middle school parent-teacher conferences, October 18th through the 21st. The 21st, we're back here for a board workshop. And let's see, as a reminder, all Board of Education meetings are open to the public, and we encourage you to attend. I will review the agendas upcoming in 7.04. Sorry, got excited there.
We'll look forward to that. 7.0, yeah. 7.02 is report of meetings, so if anyone attended a state or local meeting or parent group meeting or anything relevant to the business of what we do here, now's the time if anybody has any.
I attended the Special School District Governing Council meeting on Monday night. Some of the highlights from that meeting were a review of the new and improved partnership agreement, which should be coming soon for signatures, as well as approval of a budget adjustment. The district had a surplus of funds from COVID closures last year, and so instead of putting that in reserves, they did a stipend for all staff members, so. Thanks.
I just,
Go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say also the board advisory committees have started, and so I just wanted to congratulate everyone that's putting in the work to that, and it's been so great to see people from the community and parents and students be a part of this collaborative process to make sure that we are being transparent and having the best decisions made for our students. So it's just been really great to be a part of, and I'm really excited that they're back up and running. So, yeah.
And to piggyback on that, lots of positive comments about Zoom optional. And then also, having attended a couple of board advisory meetings, asking a representative from those meetings to attend the leadership briefings. So just bridging that communication and transparency. So I think that's wonderful. Thank you.
Anybody else? And we are lucky, as far as the advisory committees go, that we unfortunately have to turn people away. We have such an evolved community that we have plenty of people willing to step up and get involved, so we appreciate that. 7.03, no announcements, so 7.04, here's your big moment.
It's me again. It's me again. So our next meeting's agenda in October, we're scheduled to meet on October 21st at 4:30 for our workshop, where we will hear about our communication covenants and our Compass update. Our regular Board of Education meeting then will follow at 7. And some tentative agenda items will be our vote on the 2022-23 school calendar, second reading, regular business items, and the items that are under our 4 records in here would also be scheduled for then as well. And again, our workshop is open to the public, so if you want to hear about where we're headed in the next year or so, or updates, fantastic. We'll see you there.
All right, thank you. 7:05, we have no member appointments, so we'll go to 7.06, which is the MSBA board report. So Colin, if you'd like to play that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Missouri School Boards Association's board report for the month of September. We thank you for the opportunity to share some news and information during a few minutes of your board meeting. We begin with a look at the release of this year's state assessment data. The MAP assessments have served as the cornerstone of state and federal accountability systems for more than 20 years, but not this year. Students throughout Missouri took the MAP assessments last spring under the unprecedented circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. Because of those challenges, the State Board of Education decided to suspend the use of those test results from state and federal accountability systems this year. Commissioner of Education Margie Van Dieven cautions everyone that blanket comparisons to previous year's assessment results would be a serious misuse of the data. But she says the data will be useful in other ways.
How can we learn from this unique period of time in education and to solve issues moving forward? Like many other industries across the state and nation, we are standing at a time where we can reimagine education. And closely looking at these data will help inform those new ways of doing business. We must also use these data to help us determine what individual student groups were mostly impacted by these variables, as well as how to allocate these COVID relief dollars to best serve our students, educators, and schools.
Van Dieven says she's pleased the high participation rate in last spring's assessments means there's no need for a fall testing window this year.
These data, along with your local assessments and other key data points, will shed light on the learning across our state and help us understand where Missouri students are academically and how to overcome the pandemic-related challenges presented. We look forward to working alongside local school leaders as we dig further into these data and together learn all we can to continue improving lives through education well into the future.
The statewide assessment data is being released this month, and individual school district data will be made available at a later date. As the new school year resumes in the midst of the continuing COVID-19 pandemic, school districts are placing a high priority not just on protecting the physical health of students, teachers, and staff, but also on addressing their mental health needs. Educators and mental health professionals are seeing more cases of anxiety and even depression among some students as the pandemic drags on. Detective Jason Klaus is the state coordinator for the Missouri Crisis Intervention Team, a group that teaches law enforcement officers and first responders how to recognize a mental health crisis and de-escalate the situation. Klaus, a former school resource officer in Perry County, says the group works closely with school safety personnel.
We work with a lot of school resource officers who are law enforcement, training them in crisis intervention, that de-escalation technique. But it really doesn't stop there, because if you think about your school counselors, your school administrators, your teachers, your custodians, bus drivers, they all find themselves in the middle of, a student, maybe even parents that may be in a mental health type crisis. So the skills, the de-escalation, all is very important to really an entire school district staff.
Klaus adds it's important for teachers to recognize changes in student behavior.
And they really are the first ones to recognize a change in that student, a change in behavior. And it could be something of grades start to drop, even by, a half a grade, which is out of their norm. Maybe truancy starts to become an issue, just things that are out of place. It is very paramount to begin that conversation of asking that person, is there something you'd like to talk about? Is there something going on? I've seen some changes, but by ignoring it, you kind of allow that situation to continue and get to a point where now it's maybe beyond what that teacher or conversation can do to really bring that individual back around and offer those services.
Klaus spoke at the recent School Safety Academy sponsored by MSBA's Center for Education Safety. The no-cost training is designed for school safety coordinators, school resource officers, and school protection officers, and allows them to earn a school safety specialist certification. A second School Safety Academy is scheduled for this month. There's still time to register for the 2021 MSBA Annual Conference in cooperation with the Missouri Association of School Administrators to be held November 5th through 7th in Kansas City. The event will once again feature numerous breakout sessions and workshops, many presented by school leaders from districts throughout the state, along with a great lineup of general session speakers, all in a new location at the Kansas City Convention Center. Among the general session speakers this year is former Kansas City Chiefs tight end and Pro Football Hall of Famer Tony Gonzalez, who is a strong advocate for programs designed to provide emotional support for children so they can be successful in school. And don't forget the 2021 Safe Schools and Colleges Forum, sponsored by MSBA's Center for Education Safety, that will be held this year on November 4th in conjunction with the annual conference in Kansas City. Check the MSBA website for registration information and a schedule of conference sessions. That's it for this month's edition of the MSBA Board Report. Thanks for allowing us to have some time at your board meeting, and so long from Columbia.
All right. We'll move to 8.0, which is special reports. So this is when we do our cabinet update. So Joelle, I think you have a finance committee update.
Yes, you were there. No. Yes, we had our finance advisory committee. It was on Tuesday. We have some new members and we have some student members, which is nice. The last couple times we've had students attend, and it really makes the meeting different, and it's enjoyable with the questions they bring to the table. Of course, we did a deep dive into the tax rate, much more than at the hearing. We got into some of the nitty-gritty on how that works, and then we talked about general items on the board for approval tonight.
All right, thank you. Dr. McKinney, HR.
Our committee did not meet this month, but we are scheduled for next month, so my report is brief.
Thank you. Dr. Sparks, your three committees.
Yes, and I have to reiterate what Megan and Christy said. It's been really nice to be back in person and have committees. The energy in the room with each of these was really positive, and especially when you consider that throughout the advisories last year, people had come in new to the advisories and then everything was on Zoom. So this was our first time coming back, not just with our new members of the advisory, but also being in person with the ones who were new to the advisory process last year. So some great energy in our conversations. Each of these committees started with kind of reviewing where we've been over the past so that everyone who is new to the advisory could be up to date on what we've been doing and where we're going. So with teaching and learning, we spent some time really reviewing the curriculum writing process, helping the group to understand what that looks like and what their role will be within it, as well as their role within our Compass goals. And then spent some time gathering feedback around what are strengths of the district, what are priorities that they'd like to see as a focus of the district, and then what are some opportunities that we have to abandon practices as a district. So really collecting some of that as a baseline for future conversations. Student life, we spent some time reviewing our progress on the mental health hub that is being developed. That was a large part of the work from the committee last spring, and giving feedback about what would need to be available for parents on our website. So We updated them with regard to where we are in that development, and then spent some time gathering feedback on our digital wellness scope and sequence. There is we've essentially taken standards that are already embedded within health, literacy, science, technology, engineering, math, and computer science, as well as our library, media, and counseling standards, and organize them into a document that highlights where digital wellness fits within all of these different areas. And so the committee took a look at what we currently have and identified potential areas of gaps, opportunities for improvement, so that we can continue to focus on digital wellness for our students. And then finally, our technology board advisory spent some time reviewing the work that has been done since the assessment of technology services a few years ago, which, as you all know, that has been an extensive amount of work over the past few years. And then gathered some feedback from them with regard to what are the topics they want to focus on this year. Getting some information about what the needs are for a student information system as we investigate what we currently use and look for opportunities for improvement. And then also just start of school practices and how it's been. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I believe right back to you for 8.02, your teaching and learning update, which is on the screen, it looks like.
Yes, I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Craig Hamby, our Executive Director of Elementary Education, and Dr. Ronnie Zagora, our Executive Director of Secondary Education, as we talk to you tonight about our grading practices and the work that we've been doing to really shift the mindset around grading and the impact that that has for our students. So Colin, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So this work officially started back in 2017-18. We developed what is called the Lindbergh Learning Team, and this is a group that is primarily composed of teachers, because when you think about grading, it is a very classroom-based endeavor. It's directly connected to philosophies of learning, and it is directly connected to the instruction that happens within the classroom. So we were very intentional in our work that teacher voice needed to be prevalent as we made decisions about what direction we wanted to go for the future of grading practices within Lindbergh. So we started in 2017-18 with about 43 people total, doing a book study with this particular book, Charting a Course to Standards-Based Grading, and used that to really guide us in our formulation of goals. So when we go to the next slide, you can see what the team determined needed to be our focus, that we really wanted to shift our mindset from current grading practices to ones that would result in consistent and accurate reflections of student learning. We originally said achievement for all learners, but in a recent meeting, we've decided to change that word achievement to growth, growth for all learners, and then student ownership of learning. And when we go to the next slide, I'm going to dig in a little bit more about what I mean with some of these terms. So if you think about it in terms of accuracy, you often can see a student who has a grade such as a C. What does that C represent? For one student, that might mean that they have this incredible work ethic and they are completing all of their assignments, but maybe they're not really performing to the level that we would like them to on their assessments. For another student, that C may be exactly the opposite. They're mastering their assessments, but maybe their work habits are not where they should be. What is our grade telling us? How do we get to a more accurate representation of what students actually know and can do? Ownership. I know that I've felt this before, that, this teacher gave me a B or whatever it might be. How do we, instead of determining the teacher gave me, really drill down to the student feeling that sense of, I understand what I'm supposed to learn, I know what I need to do in order to achieve these goals, and then to feel that sense of ownership, that grade is actually directly correlated to what they have learned and what they are accomplishing. And then consistency. While we have incredible professional learning communities among our teachers, there's always the reality that grading practices and priorities may differ from teacher to teacher, and really honing in to get that same level of consistency that no matter which teacher you have, those grades are going to really reflect those priority outcomes and are going to be consistent from across the buildings. Next slide, please. There was a lot of work. So while I said that we'd started this work in 2017-18, there was a lot of work behind the scenes with our Lindbergh Learning Team before we were at a point where we were ready to move out of the insular group and start to really communicate further with our teachers and with our parents. So we had the incredible opportunity to bring in Rick Wormley, who is a researcher and an author, and really essentially a grading expert. And we brought him in for a day and a half. He spent an evening with parents doing a session on busting myths about assessment and grading. It was a great evening. We had, it was pre-parent speaker series, so it was an in-person meeting. And we had about 40 to 50 families who joined us that night and really had some great questions, were excited and enthused, curious, and walked away saying, these messages make a lot of sense, that the way we've always done it isn't necessarily what's right for kids. And then the next day, we gathered all of our teachers together in one location, K-12, and spent a day with Rick Wormley, learning about why would we want to shift grading practices? What advantages are there for students when we think about grading in different ways? And really focus grading, going back to that accuracy, ownership, and consistency that is so important to support our students. So a lot of professional learning happened in that day. I'm pleased to report that even recently, we had a majority of our teachers on a professional learning survey say that they feel like the professional learning around standards-based grading practices is something they want to continue. So there's a lot of momentum in continuing this work from our staff as well. Next slide. All right, before I turn this over to Dr. Hamby to talk about where we are with elementary, I kind of want to give a broad overview of the work that we've been doing so far. So when we think about learning for students, it always starts with our curriculum. It starts with, we write the curriculum, and our goal with whenever we're writing curriculum is that it is implemented and then it goes through a full cycle. Not only are we implementing it in terms of the instruction, the resources that we choose, but then we're also assessing students' knowledge and understanding of that curriculum, and that is directly connected to the grading. So you really want that cycle to be a full cycle that's connected. Sadly, sometimes these cycles get broken. We might write a curriculum and then the implementation in the classroom may not fully match, or maybe we're not assessing on the things that we are saying were priorities within the curriculum. So it's really a focus on making what we call a guaranteed and viable curriculum, that all of these things come together under the same umbrella. And so in order to do that, one of the things that's been a big priority for us in terms of curriculum development process is identifying priority standards. Within every curriculum, what are the essential skills and knowledge that are non-negotiable for our students? If you look at all of the standards that students are supposed to master over the course of their K-12 experience, there's research out there that says it will take 20 plus years. The ability for us to meet every standard to the same degree is not possible. But when we focus on priority standards and link those to ensure that the instruction is directly connected to them, that we're assessing students on those particular standards, and then that matches the grading and the feedback that we're giving, not just to parents, but also to students, that's important work. So a lot of work has been happening behind the scenes with curriculum priority standards. At the K-5 level, proficiency scales have been developed, which really give a lot of clarity with regard to what do those standards mean? How do I know that a student has really mastered that? And then finally, in our curriculum writing process, that development of assessment so that we can really determine evidence that students have learned what we've said is most important. Dr. Hamby? Next slide, please.
So 2 pictures up here. Picture on the left probably looks very familiar to everyone. Traditional report card. Currently, our report cards look similar to this. Also, back, well, we'll say, let's take a trip back in time to when I was in first grade. The year's 1978. The report card looked pretty similar to that still. Now, the problem is, what does it really tell us about the student's learning when we look at that? When we see a 92, or we see an A-, or we see a B. It doesn't give us a lot of information as a student, as a parent, or as a teacher. On the other side, on the right side, we have a proficiency scale. So here we've taken one standard, and then we've broken that standard down into different learning targets that if a student can master these different learning targets, we would say they are proficient in that standard. Gives us a lot of information. As a teacher, I could sit down with the parent and say, here's where little Brian is in his learning, and here's where we need to go next. Or I could sit down with Brian and say, all right, Brian, here's what we've mastered so far, and here's what we need to work on for the rest of this semester. It gives us a lot of very specific information about learning. Next slide, Colin. And that's what, really grades should be, is a communication of where a student is in his or her learning. That's what we're here at school for, is to learn, and this grade should be a communication of where our students are at. Colin, next slide. It's kind of a definition of what is standards-based grading, and really it's that system of how are we progressing through these different standards. So Dr. Sparks mentioned the priority standards are the essential skills. When a student walks out of your classroom, what are the essential skills that they should have mastered in that classroom that year? So for students to know these standards and what they need to do to accomplish it seems more meaningful to them than just trying to chase a percentage or a letter grade, but they're actually trying to accrue skills and concepts. Next slide, Colin. So this is a possibility of what a grade card could look like. So instead of there being a reading grade and it just saying A or B or C, we break reading down into these priority standards or essential skills, and then we're going to track a student's progress over time in those skills. So if we look at one, let's see, I think it's right there in the middle, decoding simple words. So Colin, next slide. So how do I know if they've mastered how to decode words? Well, we will have a proficiency scale, almost like a scoring guide. This is what a student needs to do to show that they are proficient in that grade level at decoding words. So it's kind of a checklist where I could sit down with a student, I could sit down with parents, and show you, here's where we are, here's where we need to go. Next slide, Colin. I believe that's the end of the elementary slides. Questions for me before I turn it over to Dr. Zagora? Yes, sir?
Thank you. So where does that leave parents in terms of being able to accurately assess where their child's proficiency is? I see where we're going. It's sort of like almost a more soft qualitative approach, I believe, versus obviously some kind of, strict grading and so forth. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I would say it is a much more informative way of determining where a student is in their learning. So instead of just giving you a percentage of your average or your past or whatever, I'm going to tell you exactly what you've already mastered, what you know, and here's the next steps where you need to go.
Gotcha.
And go forward. So as we look at our curriculum, here's what we want you to master before you leave this class.
Right.
I'm going to break it down into where are you, and what do you need to do to get to where you checked off all the boxes?
Right. No, I understand that, and I think that's important. But then for parents, I guess, trying to grasp this and getting an understanding of sort of a kind of that baseline of where their child is. And I've always felt Lindbergh took kids where they were at, wherever their proficiency was, and enhanced them from wherever that location was for each child.
Colin, can you back me up a couple slides?
I'm sorry, Craig.
I would have Colin back me up a couple slides.
Right.
Go back to my first slide with the two pictures. Oh, back, okay. So if you look at that section 3 there, Dr. Titchlis, that's mastery. That's what we want a student to do for that standard. Above that is beyond mastery. Now, you don't check the boxes off. You notice they're not boxes or bullet points. Because once you're beyond mastery, you're beyond mastery. Anything beyond, we're going to give you that higher mark, that you're a 4, so to speak, or deep learning or transfer. That could be that you're working on that standard, but at the next grade level. Or more often it is, I can take the knowledge that I gained about this standard and I can transfer it to another context. So, but to your point of knowing exactly where you are, that's what the 3.0, the check box is. I can tell you exactly what you can do and what you still need to do. Much more accurately than me telling you got an 85%. That doesn't tell me anything.
No, I get that, but is it a matter of either or one and together? You're just saying
At elementary, it is not and.
Okay. So I just wanted some clarification.
Sure.
Thanks. Okay.
What other questions do we have?
I just have a comment that in my daughter's last year in 5th grade class, her teacher used this as kind of a test, and not being a student who really cared about A, B's, and C's, once we received this, the first time, I was able to sit down with her and say, this is what you need to learn in math, or this is what you need to do here, in order to get the check boxes off, in order to get the B or to get the A. It clicked with her, and she was straight A the rest of the year. So I found it as a parent to be an excellent tool to be able to talk to my child about what it took to get to that next grade level. So I don't know if that helps you, Mike, but I've shared that
And
with
that's,
Dr. Hamby.
that's what we're hoping for, to be a tool to communicate, whether it's between the teacher and a parent, teacher and student, or a student and a parent. Gives you a baseline of what to talk about versus if you look over the other side, let's look at that 93%. What does it really tell us about where you're at in your learning? Whereas over here, I can say, well, look, you can find the area of a rectangle, and you can do all this, but we need to work on problem solving with perimeter. So really gets very specific.
But what you're doing is, but you're going to be taking out that percentage. And
Correct.
just focusing on this.
Well,
So it's
and
not
to
a
be honest
percentage
with you-
With the qualitative and with trying to get to some core issues facing a student to achieve.
To be completely honest, we haven't done a lot of percentages and points in the elementary
Yeah,
for a
I
long
don't,
time.
like, my son's been out of elementary school for a long time. Yeah, I just wanted to
Sure.
ask, you mentioned percentages and you mentioned grades, so.
Yeah,
just wanna get
this is a short leap for elementary.
Okay.
Kathy, did you have a question?
Yes, but I don't know who it's for. So I guess I just want either one of you
Is
to...
it a difficult question?
No, no.
Well, then it's for me.
Yeah, okay, good. This is all great, obviously forward-moving and things like that, and I read through the presentation before Ronnie started too. Just a little bit about transition. So going from 5th grade to 6th grade, going from 8th to 9th, how do we train the students in the different ways that they're being looked at here? So the teachers know, parents can understand it, but what about transition?
So we're still kind of, I would guess I would call it field testing at the elementary right now. So we've done some stuff last year and this year with what we call grading guidelines, which is kind of a bridge between traditional grading and the proficiency scale. So next year, our hope is to move into those fully, not in draft form anymore. And then Dr. Zagor and I will have to start to look at how do we bridge. So we worked on kind of building the bridge from the traditional to standards. Now it's like, how do we build the bridge from elementary to middle school with this? So there's some work to be done in that area.
Yeah, and when tell me, because right now we all of a sudden we were like, we had a progress grade and we realized we missed that step in my own work. So it's great, thank you.
Any other questions for me? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamby. And Kathy, I'll probably elaborate a little bit more on what the timeline looks like, what things look like for the secondary world. So, I hear Christy talk about her daughter doesn't really care about A's, B's, C's. Our middle and high school students do. And that is one of the challenges as we look at what grading practices look like 6 through 12. So just to give you a couple of examples, and any of you that have been secondary educators, I'm sure you've experienced this, where you work really, really hard to give a quality assessment, you take time putting some feedback on it, you hand it back to the student, they look at the number or letter at the top, and it is dropped in your recycle bin as they walk out the door. Or it's final exams week, student comes to you before the final exam, what do I need to get on the final to keep my A in the class? These are common conversations that happen not just here in Lindbergh, but across the board when we talk about, especially high school students, but middle and high school, is that students have traditionally valued a grade, and we want them to value learning. And so our middle and high school students have come up in a system, not a Lindbergh system, but a system that's 100 years old in this country, have gone through a system where the grades are what is valued. And so when they are working on their learning, it often gets really reduced to that letter or that percentage. And so when Dr. Sparks talks about the 3 priorities of these grading practices, that we want grades to be accurate, we want them to be consistent, and we want our students to have ownership of learning. And so as our students mature, they're so capable of that, of having that ownership over their learning. We just have to set up a system that allows them to do that, where they can understand, here's where I am in my learning, here's what I need to do to get where I would like to go next, and I know how to do it. And so that's our emphasis when we look at 6 through 12. We're not where elementary is right now. We don't have a standards-based report card that is in draft form. Ultimately, we're trying to evolve the system so that the very clear standards are clear to teachers, students, and parents. But as our elementary students roll up through the system, we'll have to be ready for that when those students get to 6th grade and then on to 9th grade. And so we don't have an explicit timeline for that yet, but we've started the conversation, and I will tell you, we've come a very long way, I think, in taking a hard look at our grading practices. So I'm gonna give a very broad overview with the word of caution that these are very complex and nuanced conversations that we have about the teacher grade book and grading practices. And so I don't want anybody to walk away with the conclusion that we've actually answered any of these questions, because we haven't. And I don't think we're unique in Lindbergh, that most districts that look at this 6 through 12, there are a lot of challenges because our grading practices at the secondary world, they are linked to post-secondary expectations as well. You know, we have students that are applying to college, that are going into post-secondary institutions. And so what they want to see from our high school graduates doesn't always perfectly align with what we value in our students' learning. And so we're still, you know, trying to work through that system and find what is that right balance where we have very meaningful grades, but we also continue to value those things that we know will make our students successful in a post-secondary world. So we need to value those work habits and those behaviors that are really important to their being successful. And how do we do all of that in a really complex system? So next slide, please, Colin. So these are some practices that we're evaluating. And as I said, we don't have all the answers on this yet. But I think when we talk about traditional grading practices in 6th through 12th grade, and we look at some of these practices, we have to ask ourselves very serious questions about whether these practices are about the grades or are they about the learning. So when we talk about assessments, quizzes, tests, assignments, projects, we're having big conversations about reassessment. Because if a student takes a quiz or a test and they don't perform well and they don't show mastery and we move on, are we sending the message that it wasn't worth learning if they didn't learn it the first time? Because if we value it, if it's truly a priority in our learning, then we need to make sure that we are allowing students the opportunity to prove that they've mastered that standard beyond maybe the first time that they are asked to provide evidence of it. And we do, if you can take the ACT as many times as you want as a high school student. There are lots of ways that this happens outside of the classroom. And certainly all of us as adults have had multiple opportunities to show that we've learned things. So we're taking a hard look at reassessment. Similarly with things like late work, students turning in their assignments late. If they turned it late, does it automatically mean they learned less, right? If we're deducting points because it came in late, does that truly communicate their learning? So as Dr. Hamby had in the elementary presentation, grades are a communication of a student's learning. And so we need to know, did they learn that standard? Did they master that standard? And so when we boil it down to just a points system, we lose some of the richness and context of that learning. We're having a lot of conversations about zeros and failure. And is failure a motivator or a demotivator? And there's a lot of research out there that shows us that failure is a demotivator, that when students dig themselves so deep into a hole that they feel like they can't get out, then at that point, we lose that student and they no longer value their learning. And I will say with all of these, again, unanswered questions, and I want to make very clear that when I say we value the behaviors and habits that will help students, it is important that you do things on time. It is important that you focus and you turn in your work and you try to do it at the pace that's expected. But students don't all learn at the same pace. What takes one student a week to learn might take another student 4 weeks to learn. And so we have to have a system that reflects that allows for different paces of learning, and keep that also within what is reasonable and pragmatic for teachers and students. So something that a teacher taught in August or September, maybe they're not still able to retake that assessment come April. There would be reasonable timelines, and we have a lot of teachers that have been experimenting with changing their practices for several years now, and we've learned a lot of really good lessons on how we can do this effectively. Similarly with non-academic indicators, and I think Dr. Sparks highlighted this in her intro, that sometimes those grades, those averaged letter grades, they don't tell us a whole lot about the student's mastery of the standards, because we conflate things like participation and effort and compliance, and we roll all of those into one grade, and those are very, very important things to do, but they don't tell us a whole lot about what the student actually learned. And so I think it can be harmful to students on both ends of the spectrum. It can be harmful to that student who works really hard and is always on time and is always raising her hand, but really struggles to master the concepts, but might walk out of that class with an A or a B, and it's not truly a reflection of what they know. The other end of the spectrum, you may have the student who comes in and they already know all of this because they're passionate about the subject, but they don't have the behaviors, the work ethic, they're turning in their work late or they're not turning it in at all, yet they can ace every test, but they walk out with a D. So again, not a true reflection of how much that student knows and can do. And then also practices like extra credit. Again, what do they mean for the learning? And when we offer extra credit opportunities, are we suggesting that it's not meaningful? Or if it is so important that we really want it to be reflected in the student's grade, then why is it extra? You know, can we just embed that into the larger grade and the curriculum? So questions we're asking ourselves, and our professional learning communities have all done a lot of work over the last few years to kind of self-assess and where are we on some of these practices? How do we feel about some of these philosophies? And so if you can go to the next slide, Colin, I'll show you just a little bit of our timeline in the secondary world. So when the Lindbergh Learning Team first started meeting, we thought it was really important to get a baseline of where are our teachers and their grading practices. So we surveyed staff, and in some cases it was a very simple question of, do you feel like your grade book truly reflects the learning of every student in your class? And that's a big question, because if the answer is no, and it is, and it would have been for me, I will tell you, in the classroom, I did all of these things that we're now starting to reevaluate. But if the answer is no, if you can find students in the grade book where you don't feel like that grade is really a reflection of their learning, then we've got to take a step back and do some learning ourselves. So for the next couple of years, we've done a lot of professional learning on grading practices, including things like having Rick Wormley meet with the staff, but also just within professional learning communities, within buildings. And then last year, with learning in a COVID environment, I think in some ways it expedited some of this work because we had less face-to-face time with our students. We had to focus on those really high priorities and those meaningful assignments and assessments. And so it actually sped up some of our work in helping that communication with students of here's the absolute need to know to have you ready for what comes next and using the grades as a communication tool for that. So this year we have a lot of agreements within our professional learning communities about what the teachers that teach that similar grade level or content area have agreed to put into practice. These are some great laboratories for what works and how do we make it work. There are technology questions here as well because this is a complex grading system and ultimately we will need a technology tool that reflects that can house that information and communicate it to students and parents as well. And so trying a lot of new things, getting ready for the elementary students that in a couple of years will be rolling up and be more familiar with this system. And I joke with Dr. Hamby that if he does it well, we won't have to do any of this. The students will just come to us and they'll know what meaningful grades really are. So beyond this year, we'll just continue to collect feedback. We want to make sure we include student feedback, parent feedback on this process, and continue moving in a direction where we can shift that emphasis from the grade to learning. Thank you very much. Questions? Yeah.
Thanks for the very informative presentation. And again, I totally get it. I mean, there are some kids who, for instance, students who have a fantastic memory, even a rote memory. They can do really well on tests, and then, but what did they really learn? You know, and they come out of this obviously with a grade, ultimately a GPA, based on that. So I get it when it comes to, you know, again, kind of those softer variables of student learning and, you know, those non-academic indicators and so forth. And I know I mentioned this with Craig earlier, obviously maybe a little less of a concern at the elementary stage, but at 6 through 12. And I guess this is my thought, you know, and I'm sure you guys on the committee had talked about this, that as students prepare for post-secondary education, whether that's in a college, even a trade school, somewhere, you know, out there, that, you know, GPAs are so important, as are certain test scores. And even though some colleges I know have, I think, done away with or rolled back a requirement for GPA, I imagine there's some that, maybe quite a few that still do. So how would we balance that to make sure that, if a student wants to apply to a certain school, that they'll still be able to show performance. And again, it doesn't always say what a student has learned, but, that's the indicator that's still often expected, past high school. So have you guys been dealing with that, talking about that too?
Yeah, I think your question highlights the challenge of all of this, which is how do we marry valuing learning with a system that sometimes still needs that letter grade or GPA representation of learning. And so I think right now we're working toward what's that middle ground? How do we reevaluate some of our practices? How do we shift that focus to learning with the knowledge that it may still, and likely will still, result in a semester grade when all is said and done? But what does that semester grade mean at that point? If we have communicated along the way, if it's not, let's say, an average of first and second quarter, but it's truly at the end of the semester, this letter grade represents what you have learned over the course of this semester, what you at this point at the end of the grading period can demonstrate, then it's already more communicative than what it's been before. And then as for things like the habits and behaviors and work ethic and those kinds of things, while they're probably still evident in the grade in many cases, we've also talked a lot about how does a student develop a portfolio to show that. So as we look at the college application process and as it evolves and they ask for more than just a numerical representation of a student, what does a student have to show for themselves of how they have grown in some of those areas as well?
Mike, I have a question. I keep hearing you say softer things and softer skills, and I'm not quite sure what you mean, because what I saw was a list of very specific skills with a checkbox next to each one.
Right.
And so to me, that wasn't, they weren't soft things. It was like, knows the area of a triangle.
I'm sorry, what?
The list of, like, when Craig had an example, Dr. Hamby had an example up, it was very specific, like, can find the area of a rectangle, can find the
Right.
area. So to
Right.
me, those aren't soft things. Those are very specific learning standards.
Well, they are learning standards, and I get that. But then also looking on to 6 through 12, we're talking about what does a student bring to it, given, where they're at in their location, on their proficiencies. As I brought up a good example, and it's somewhat common, students don't always, students that do perform well on tests doesn't necessarily mean that they learn everything. But how do you get at that? Well, you could have some checkoff boxes like that. That's true, and I get that, and it's more appropriate for elementary. But when we're in a 6 through 12 environment, and again, we're kind of looking ahead to post high school. And look, I would guess the higher ed post-secondary education systems aren't necessarily all caught up to this kind of means of assessment. How do we still keep a student in that mode of assessment while also finding ways to enhance their own knowledge of what they're learning? How are they really learning it, and if they have any particular issues around learning? And I'm familiar with that, even with some students that I've known. That, how can those be addressed? And that's what I meant by softer skills, okay? Beyond just rote memorization.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because that
Yeah.
wasn't what I was taking from when you
No,
used
yeah.
that phrase.
And I think you speak to the process of, we're being very methodical in our work. This has not been quick work, this has not been fast work, it's been very strategic. It's something that we are taking step by step in order to do right, because we recognize the challenges that exist. So when you think about it, we started this conversation in 2017, and here we are in 2021, 22, just getting ready to do something in the next year with an elementary report card. So it's very methodical in all of our work to make sure that we are really trying to do it as well as we can to meet the needs of our kids.
Right, and and I get it, and I think also, obviously, communication with parents is going to be critical in terms of their support in all this. So, whatever assessment tools we use, that's going to be communicated, and those outcomes hopefully will change and grow and so forth as continue to work with parents too. So anyway, thanks. Didn't mean to, spend too much time. Thank you, Mom.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Under 8.03, now we do have a COVID update for the district. Dr. McKinney.
Thank you, sir. Occasionally, I'm accused of only bringing bad news to the table, so I thought tonight that I would start this presentation by letting you know I've got some good news, and we've got some statistics, and I'm happy to share those tonight in our COVID-19 report. It's amazing to me that tomorrow, as of tomorrow, we'll have been in school a month already. That's a while. That's my first stat that should blow you away. A month of school. And the district has managed, to this point, fairly well, COVID-19 pandemic and the Delta variant. I want to go back to our primary goal, the opening task force that met over the summer multiple times determined that our goal coming into this year would be to prioritize and protect in-person learning. We want to do that in a safe way, but we need kids to be in school. Many of us are parents up here, including myself, and last year having kids not in school, not in sports, not in music, not in the things that they love was difficult, and it made for a tough year. So the main goal was to prioritize in-person learning. We were given a great tool by the St. Louis County Public Health Department, which is modified quarantine. Modified quarantine allows students to stay in school even when someone in their classroom is positive for COVID, as long as the district implements universal masking and that students are asymptomatic. And so this has been a big shift for us. Last year, if we had a positive case in the classroom, we closed that classroom, whether students were sick or not. And so we sent a lot of healthy kids home as a mitigation strategy, and that was the rule. This year with modified quarantine, we've been able to take a different approach, and it's helped us keep students in school, healthy students in school. So right now, as we sit here today, there are 83 students in grades K through 12 that if we were using full quarantine from last year, 83 students would be home right now. Those students are in school. So that's the headline really of this slide. The modified quarantine is keeping kids in school. The only way that students are eligible for modified quarantine is if the school has universal masking and has other mitigation strategies in place, which we do. We've had some limited cases of transmission. I'm going to show a slide in just a moment that will give some data. The data doesn't take into account this week, so there will be a little bit of a lag, maybe from what you see on the website on the website tracking. But we've had limited cases, and we've had very limited transmission within the schools, and that is because students and staff are staying home when they're sick or they're symptomatic, and that's really a great key. Also, universal masking and other mitigation strategies. I would say that we understand that wearing masks is uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable right now, sitting here wearing this and talking to you. It's inconvenient. All of us want to get to a time where we don't wear masks in our jobs. We don't send our children to school. I have two girls that tell me all the time that they don't like wearing masks. So I don't know if they're campaigning or just complaining, but it's worth it to keep them in school. And so we hope for a time when we can get rid of these masks, when they can be optional. We look at the data every day. There was a time back in June where we had a mask optional scenario. But the data that we look at every day and the guidance from CDC and other health organizations has changed tremendously due to the rise in Delta variant cases. Delta variant impacts children. You've probably seen on the news, there was news this morning about a neighboring school district that's really suffering from in-school transmission of the Delta variant of COVID-19. We don't have a magic number or a metric that we would look at to say, when we get to this place, the decision will be made to take masks off and make them optional in school. However, we're going to watch the data, and we're going to watch our own transmission rates. And when levels get to a point such as the super low levels of May and June, a conversation certainly will be had. I think the district has shown a great ability to pivot and phase things in and phase things out as the reality on the ground changes, and that's a strength of Lindbergh, and last year is evidence of that as we moved in different ways and did things based on science and data and our own situation that we study here. If we could go to the next slide, I do have some data to share with you. Again, this is somewhat dated, but it's worth looking at. School contacts means that students were in school with COVID and they were contagious, and that has been limited to this point in the school year. We've got quite a few students, as you'll see there are 31 students, positive cases without school contacts, and that simply means, as of this report, that those students had it in the summer and didn't start school with us. They were either positive or they were finishing isolation. At this point, 3 staff members positive, which is an incredible number. 85% of our staff is reported as vaccinated, which is an incredible number. We figure that's a little bit low. Some people don't like to fill out our surveys. We do this voluntarily. We don't mandate reporting, so we just ask people, we beg and plead for people to let us know if they are. And 85% is a strong number. We're proud of that number. We think it's probably higher than that. Obviously, 100 is where we would like to be. But as a staff, we're very well protected. The quarantine data, you can see 57 students as of this report were under modified quarantine, which means they get to come to school every day. They're just asked to follow quarantine guidance when they're at home and in the community. And we have had 106 students out of school. Again, that's based on things that happened in the summer or exposures, during the weekend, but that's not the district putting these kids into quarantine. This is pediatricians or the county health department. So that's the data. It will change. We're only a month into the school year, but it's good news to this point. The masking, I know, is a hot topic and it can be debated, but the fact is, if we want to access modifying quarantine, keep these 83 kids in school instead of sending them home in a healthy situation, we have to do this. As much as I know the people at this table don't like having these on right now, I know the kids don't, but we need our kids to be in school, and we established that as a priority earlier in the summer when we had our task force. So happy to answer any questions or turn it over to Dr. Lake for anything else.
Brian, I just had a quick question. Thank
Sure.
you for that report and for staying on top of it. You've been really doing a great job of that. In terms of some of our students who have maybe some special needs or they don't really work well with masks, are we able to accommodate those students when those issues do arise?
It's a great question. Certainly we do. There are cases where students cannot wear masks, and we have a mask exemption process that is, as we were consulted with by the Department of Public Health, and we use that, that processing, and we put other mitigation strategies in place when we can't have a mask on a child. But absolutely, there are some students that can't wear a mask. That's the way it is. We understand it. We still want them in school, so we find other ways to mitigate the transmission or the danger there.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's informative, and I've said this before, this is the goal of everyone up here, and everyone that comes in this building is educating kids. So, the purpose of the mask stops and starts with getting kids in person and educated. So I think the 83 kids, that's a big story. So something right now is working. Hopefully we don't have to wear these forever or too much longer. Anybody that knows me well knows I cannot stand wearing it, but I do it because that's what we have to do. So we'll move now to 9.0, which is action items by consent. We have action items by consent 9.01 to 9.11. Would anyone like to remove any of these items for individual consideration? Okay, hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve consent items 9.01 to 9.11, but Also noting that there is nothing this month in 9.07 or 9.08.
So moved.
Motion by Jen, second.
Second.
Second by Christie. Any questions or comments before we go to vote? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. Move to 10.0, which is an individual action item. We do have one, Joella Architectural Engineering and Design Services request for qualifications.
Yes, on the individual action item, this is presented for board approval for a second architectural engineering and design firm for the district. One of our goals in the district is continuous maintenance of our properties and facility improvements. And a best practice in St. Louis County is really to have 2 architects on staff so that you can spread the wealth of all the work that we have to do. And we have a lot of work to do now and in the future. The process per our policy when you're looking at hiring an architect is to do a request for qualifications. We followed that policy and we put a qualifications proposal out in the paper and on our vendor registry submittal. We had 23 different downloads of the proposal from multiple firms in Missouri and even out of Missouri to look at our posting. At the date the posting was due, we had 3 firms submit a proposal. Then we had an interview process, which several of the board members here, Dr. Lake and myself, interviewed the 3 firms with really our focus of projects for them in the future, the second architect conversation, and then just 5 questions that we ask all of them together. According to our policy, we are to rank those architectural firms. We had a grading card criteria. Everybody did that and turned them in, and we have ranked the 3 firms that we interviewed. And the top firm that we'd like to recommend to move forward to negotiate a contract is Perkins & Will and Hayner. The other 2 firms will be, again, kept in the ranking, and if a contract is unable to be negotiated with the first firm, we have the other firms to fall back on. But our recommendation is at this point to take the information we received in the proposals and then move forward with negotiating with that team. Again, we had Mike Tishlis, Shamia, or Christy Watts was on the committee, and Matt Alonso. So I don't know if you have anything to share about it. Okay.
Good process.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right, so do I have a motion to approve item? Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve item 10.01 as presented?
You do? So moved.
So moved by Kathy, second.
Second.
Second by Megan. Any questions before we move to a vote? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. 11.0 reports, these are for the record. We do have 3. 11.0101 is our green light plan. So any questions can be directed to any board member really, or Dr. Lake specifically. 11.0102, Title I evaluation. Any questions you have on that, direct those to Dr. Sparks.
And I would like to, if I can have a moment, I would like to share something about the Title I evaluation. So this is our first time doing a Title I evaluation. It was a new process that was required by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And so when you read this particular evaluation, note that it is based on last year's programming for Title I. And an interesting thing to be aware of is that our Title I dollars shifts from year to year depending on what our census poverty data is. So in the 2020-21 school year, we had $323,000 that was allocated towards Title I programming from the federal government. As we entered into this school year, the 21-22 school year, that number dropped to $110,000. $1,273,000. And that's based on what our poverty rates were back in 2019. So we see this fluctuation that happens from year to year in our federal dollars. What we've been able to do is sustain the programs the reading programs that we had specifically as a part of Title I going into this year, but it's local dollars that is covering that difference in the lost revenue. So something I wanted you to be aware of as you're reading that Title I evaluation.
Great, thank you. 11.0103 is our 22-23 school calendar, and questions for that also, I believe, go to Dr. Sparks if you have them. Those are the three items for the record. We don't have anything on 1102 or 1103, so we'll move to 12.0, which is citizen comments regarding non-agenda items. We do just have one individual signed up, and that would be Maki Randleman. Maki knows the process, so I don't have to repeat.
May I take this? Hi, Maki Randleman. Tonight I'd like to talk about inclusion. I grew up in Japan and lived in Israel before we immigrated to the US 9 years ago. Having my very different life experiences, the way the Lindbergh community accepted us was a demonstration of a true and beautiful balance of inclusion and respect. Our eldest son was 9 years old without any knowledge in English when we came here. Usually, bilingual students close the language gap by this age. The ELL program pulled him out every day and taught him English. It was a huge gap, but the ELL closed it. Today, he is a senior at the high school with great academic achievements, and he's a very happy student who loves school. I am grateful for the service he was provided with. It was the most important inclusion that an academic institution could have provided. I have here Lindbergh map stats from 2019. I'll hand it over to you later, which was before COVID. About 12% of ELL students were below basic in English. It's a fair number since they were still learning English. But Black students, as defined here in the stats taken from DESE, about 26% of them were also below basic. More than double of ELL students. Clearly, ELL method of closing the gap is working. A similar service should be provided for every struggle student. The reason of struggle should not matter for this service if it is due to immigration, a learning disability, or cultural background. The school is an academic institution. Its inclusion must start with academic needs. From our first-hand experience, I can testify that when the academic needs were met, our children flourished naturally, and through it, we were truly included by the school system. We have a gap closing program which works. Please consider the success of the ELL program as a template to expand inclusion in your schools. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have any other speakers, so we'll move to 13.0, which is recess. We've already conducted our executive session, so there's no need to move to, or no need to recess. We'll move to 15.0, which is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn meeting 1539?
So moved.
Motion by Matt, second?
Second.
Second by Jen. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, board meeting 1539 is adjourned.